The document I had been carrying in my coat pocket for 3 days was a copy of my own will, not because I was dying. I was 68 years old, healthy enough to split firewood in the backyard of my house in Guelph, Ontario, healthy enough to walk the Speed River Trail every morning before the frost burned off the grass. I was carrying it because something had started to feel wrong in my own home, and I couldn't name it yet. Just a pressure behind the sternum. The kind you get when you know the answer to something, but your brain hasn't caught up to your gut. My wife, Loretta, had passed 2 years before. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. We'd been married 41 years. After she was gone, the house felt like a building I was renting from someone else's memory. Every room had her in it, the kitchen especially. She'd painted the cabinets herself. This particular shade of sage green she'd picked out of a magazine and matched at the hardware store. I kept the color. I kept everything. My daughter Joanne had been wonderful in the beginning. She drove up from Mississauga twice a month, brought groceries, sat with me through the long Sunday afternoons. Her husband, a man named, well, I always called him my son-in-law. Even to his face, a habit Loretta had started as a gentle joke, and he'd never corrected. He came too sometimes, quieter than Joanne. The kind of man who always seems to be calculating something in a back room of his mind. My son Neville lived in Vancouver. We talked on Sundays. He'd offered to come stay after the funeral, and I'd told him not to, that I was fine. I was not fine, but I meant it in the way that men of a certain generation mean it. Not a lie exactly, more like a declaration of intent. It was somewhere in the second year, after Loretta's estate was fully settled, that things began to shift. The house in Guelph was worth about $900,000 by then. The market had done what markets do. Loretta and I had bought it in 1989 for just under $200,000, put 30 years of weekends into it. New insulation, the addition off the back, the garden that Loretta designed from a book she'd borrowed from the public library and never returned. The mortgage was paid. The property was mine outright. Joanne started mentioning the house more. Casually at first. Dad, have you thought about what you want to do with the place long term? Have you looked into a continuing care community in Mississauga? You'd be closer to us. I told her I hadn't thought about it, which was true. I liked my house. I liked my neighbors. I liked my routine. The idea of leaving Guelph felt like leaving Loretta twice. Then my son-in-law started joining the conversations. He had opinions about property values, about estate planning, about the inefficiency of one person occupying a 4-bedroom house. He framed everything as concern. We just want to make sure you're protected, Dad. That was the first time he called me Dad. Something about it landed wrong. In March, Joanne asked if she could bring someone to the house. A financial planner, she said, just to help me understand my options. I said yes. What else do you say? The planner was a young woman who worked out of an office in Mississauga. She spoke very quickly and had a folder of documents she slid across my kitchen table. She talked about registered accounts and estate efficiency, and something called a family trust structure. I am not a stupid man. I spent 30 years as an electrical engineer. I know how to read a document, but this particular collection of documents was written in a language designed to obscure rather than clarify, and I noticed that several of the pages had signature lines already flagged with those little yellow sticky tabs. I didn't sign anything. I said I wanted to have my own lawyer look it over. Joanne looked at my son-in-law. My son-in-law looked at the table. The planner said that was completely reasonable and packed up her folder, and we drank tea and talked about nothing for another 20 minutes, and then they left. That night I sat in the kitchen under Loretta's green cabinets, and I thought, did I just imagine that? I called my lawyer the next morning. A man named Whitmore who'd handled our affairs for years. Semi-retired now, but he picked up. I described the meeting. He was quiet for a moment. Did you sign anything? No. Good. Send me the documents if you can get copies. I didn't have copies. I hadn't thought to ask for any. 2 weeks later, Joanne called to say the planner needed a few more things from me. Just some basic information to finalize the estate planning framework. She used that word, framework, 3 times in the same sentence. I said I'd think about it. I did not call her back. Instead, I drove to Whitmore's office and we had a long conversation. He said that without seeing the documents, he couldn't say for certain, but the structure Joanne had described, a family trust with Joanne and her husband named as trustees, was a legitimate tool that could also, in the wrong hands, effectively transfer control of an estate away from its owner while leaving that owner's name on the paperwork. It's not necessarily malicious, he said, but it could be. He looked at me over his glasses. It could be. I drove home on the 401 with the radio off, the flat gray of early spring out the window. Farmers' fields still brown. The sky the color of old nickels. I kept thinking about the yellow sticky tabs on the signature lines. How they were already there when she pulled the folder out. Before we'd discussed anything. Before she'd even asked me a single question about what I wanted. That was when I decided I needed to know more before I did anything at all. The idea came to me gradually, not all at once. I was standing in the backyard in April, looking at the cedar fence Loretta and I had built together in 2003, and I thought, the only way to know if something real is happening is to create a situation where it has to happen without me watching. I told Joanne I was going up to a friend's cottage near Huntsville for 10 days. My old colleague from the engineering firm, a man everyone called Brick, his last name was Brickman, had a place on Fairy Lake. He and I went up every spring, or we used to, before Loretta got sick. I said I was finally ready to go again. It wasn't entirely a lie. Brick had been asking me for 2 years, but I didn't go to Huntsville. I packed a bag and drove to a motel in Cambridge 40 minutes away. Told no one except Brick, who thought the whole thing was either brilliant or the beginning of a breakdown, and agreed to cover for me if Joanne called. The first night in the motel room, I ate a sandwich from the gas station down the road and watched the news and felt completely absurd. The room smelled like industrial cleaning solution, and the window faced a parking lot. I was a 68-year-old man in a motel eating a gas station sandwich because he was suspicious of his own daughter. I almost drove home, but I didn't. I had asked my next-door neighbor in Guelph, a woman who had lived beside us for 22 years, who had brought casseroles after Loretta died and shoveled my front walk twice that winter without being asked, to keep an eye on the house. I told her I was going to a cottage, but asked her to let me know if anything unusual happened. She had my cell number. She was the kind of person who noticed things. She called me on the 3rd day. She said there had been a car in my driveway the evening before. Joanne's car, and another car she didn't recognize. A gray sedan. 2 people had gone inside. They'd been there for about 2 hours. I thanked her and hung up and sat on the edge of the motel bed. 2 hours. Joanne had a key. I'd given it to her after Loretta died, in case of emergency. An emergency was, apparently, now defined as a Tuesday evening when her father was believed to be in Muskoka. I drove back to Guelph the next morning and parked on a side street 2 blocks from my house where I could see nothing except the neighbor's roof, which was useless. I felt foolish. Then I thought about what an engineer does when he needs information he can't observe directly. He sets up instrumentation. I went to an electronics shop and bought 2 small cameras, the kind people use as doorbell cameras or to watch for package thieves. I installed one above the front door and one in the living room, angled toward the main hallway. It took me most of the afternoon. I didn't go inside except to set them up and leave. I drove back to Cambridge. The cameras connected to an app on my phone. On the 2nd night after I installed them, I was lying in the motel bed reading when my phone vibrated with a motion alert. I opened the app. Joanne was in my living room. Her husband was with her. There was a 3rd person I did not recognize, a man in a dark jacket, carrying a briefcase. They were standing near the bookcase where Loretta and I kept our photo albums and, on the bottom shelf, the binder with our household documents. The man with the briefcase had the binder open on the coffee table. I watched through the small screen of my phone in a motel in Cambridge as someone I didn't know went through my personal papers in my own home. My son-in-law said something and Joanne nodded. The man with the briefcase pointed at something in the binder. Joanne took a photograph of it with her phone. I don't remember making a decision to call Whitmore right then. I just found myself dialing. It was 9:30 in the evening. He answered. I described what I was watching. He told me to keep recording, make sure the app was set to save footage to cloud storage, and to not go to the house yet. Not yet, he said. Let me make some calls tomorrow. I did not sleep that night. Whitmore had a contact, a woman, a legal investigator who worked with estate disputes quietly before they became full disputes. She met me at a coffee shop in Guelph 2 days later, when I'd returned to the motel after a brief stop at the house to check the cameras. She was direct without being cold. She asked me to walk her through the sequence of events from the beginning, and I did, and she listened the way professionals listen, without filling silences, without reacting. When I finished, she said, "The man with the briefcase is likely an assessor." I didn't understand. She explained. There are people, legitimate professionals, and also less legitimate ones who are hired to assess whether an individual is capable of managing their own affairs, cognitive assessments. In Ontario, if someone can establish to the appropriate legal channels that a person lacks capacity, they can apply to become that person's substitute decision maker, which means they make decisions about finances, about property, about where that person lives. Your daughter may be building a case that you're not competent, she said. She said it plainly without softness. I was grateful for that. I sat with my coffee and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of grief. Because Joanne had sat with me in this same city after her mother died and held my hand in the parking lot of the hospital and cried in a way I hadn't seen since she was small. That person was real. I knew she was real. And I could not understand how both things could be true at once. Is she wrong? I asked. The investigator looked at me. Is there something I'm missing? Am I not handling things the way I should be? You installed surveillance cameras in your own home, drove yourself to Cambridge, identified the problem, called your lawyer, and found me, she said. You tell me. I called Neville that night, not to ask for help. I didn't want to pull him across the country before I knew what was actually happening. I just told him that there were some things with the estate I needed to sort out, and I might need him to come to Ontario in the next few weeks. He asked if I was all right. I said yes, and for the first time in months it was true in the way I meant it to be. Not a declaration of intent, but a statement of fact. Over the next week, with Whitmore's guidance and the investigator's help, I learned the shape of what had been happening. Joanne and my son-in-law had engaged a financial services firm, not the one that had sent the planner in March. A different one, more aggressive, with the intent of establishing a power of attorney and then a family trust that would effectively transfer management of the house and my registered accounts to them. The man with the briefcase had been a private assessor, not a regulated medical professional, hired to generate a document suggesting I showed signs of cognitive decline. That document didn't exist yet, but the groundwork was being laid. What Joanne may not have fully understood, or perhaps had chosen not to examine too carefully, was that what they were doing walked right up to the edge of elder financial abuse under the Criminal Code of Canada. Whitmore used that phrase without drama, the way you state a fact. I did not want to destroy my daughter. I want to be honest about that. Some part of me, even then, was looking for an exit that didn't require burning everything down. She was my child. I had watched her learn to ride a bike in the driveway of this house. I remembered what she looked like at 7, standing at the top of the stairs on Christmas morning. But I also knew that if I did nothing, I would lose everything Loretta and I had built together. And worse, I would have allowed it to happen. Whitmore drafted a letter. It went to Joanne and her husband directly, with copies to the financial services firm and the private assessor. It laid out what we knew, what the cameras had recorded, what the legal implications were of proceeding any further. It was not threatening in tone. It was thorough. It was, Whitmore told me, what a letter that means business looks like when it is written by someone who knows how to write such a letter. I also revised my power of attorney documents, naming Whitmore as my attorney for property, and a close friend, my former colleague Brick, who was steady and honest, and had no financial interest in my estate, as my attorney for personal care. Then I called Joanne. It was a Sunday evening. I was in my own kitchen, sitting at my own table, under the sage green cabinets. I had come home. I was not going to be removed from my home. She answered and said, "Dad, how was the cottage?" "Joanne," I said, "I need you to listen to me." There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone knows what's coming, even if they don't know exactly what shape it will take. I told her I knew what had been happening. I didn't enumerate it. I didn't accuse her husband specifically or describe the cameras or mention the investigator. I simply told her that I knew, that my lawyer knew, and that it was over. She said, "Dad, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you." "You were in my house," I said, "when you thought I wasn't there, with someone going through my papers." Silence. "I'm not diminished, Joanne. I'm not confused. I'm 68 years old, and I'm in full possession of my faculties and my property, and I intend to stay that way. What happens next is up to you." She started to cry. I waited. I didn't hang up, and I didn't comfort her either. I just waited. Eventually she said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I don't know what she was sorry for specifically. I didn't ask. Maybe she didn't know either. Some apologies are more like releases than reckonings. You say the word and something loosens, but you haven't yet examined what the word is trying to cover. Her husband never called. I didn't expect him to. Neville flew in from Vancouver 3 weeks later. I told him everything over 2 evenings at the kitchen table, going through it in order, the way you'd file an incident report. He was angry in a way I recognized, the quiet, effortful kind, where the anger is being kept below the surface by a conscious act of will. He asked what he could do. I told him he was already doing it by being there. He stayed for a week. We fixed the back fence together, the cedar one Loretta and I had built. Several boards had rotted at the base. We pulled the old boards out and put in new ones, and when we were done, the fence was mostly original and partly new, and it still looked right. Joanne and I have spoken twice since then. It's difficult in the way that things are difficult when something true has been said that can't be unsaid. I don't know what the future of that relationship is. I think about it sometimes when I'm walking the river trail in the mornings. I haven't found a clean answer, but I still live in my house. My name is on the deed. Loretta's cabinets are still that particular shade of sage green. On the bookcase in the living room, our photo albums are right where they've always been, and the household binder is back in its place on the bottom shelf. I'm the one who decides what happens to all of it. That was never in question, but for a while I had let it become one. The mistake I made was the one a lot of people make when they're grieving. I confused needing people with needing to trust them without limit. Those are not the same thing. Love doesn't require you to hand someone the keys and look away. The cameras are still up, by the way. I see the cardinals at the feeder in the front yard every morning on the app. My neighbor waves at the one by the door sometimes because she figured out it was there and thinks it's funny. Brick says I've become a surveillance expert and that I should consult for the federal government. I tell him I'm retired. I've been retired long enough to know what I have, and I am not letting go of it.